Alright, so today we're going to be factoring quadratics in ax squared plus bx plus c form. And we're going to factor by grouping, not just like any other factoring. So today we're going to factor by grouping. Tomorrow we'll do a different method. Either way, you still get to the same answer. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. So when we are factoring by grouping, this means that in front of our x squared term in our quadratic expression, there's actually going to be a number. And if you look down at the example quickly, there is a 5 in front of the x squared. Before now, we were always just working with 1x squared. So now that we have a number in front of x squared, we are going to have to look for the greatest common factor other than 1 if possible. And again, I write that if possible, and the reason for that is because sometimes there is not a greatest common factor between all three terms. But if you are looking at the example below, there is a greatest common factor, and that is 5 by all three parts. So 5 is in common, not x, because 10 does not have an x with it. So when we factor our 5 out, we are left with 1x squared plus 3x plus 2. And at this point, that means we do not have to do step 2, which is awesome. But I will show you forward examples, more of those, that we will have to do step 2. So I will show you that process. So now, all I need to do is find factors of c that add up to b. So factors of number of 2 are pretty easy, 1 and 2. 1 times 2 gives us 2. And 1 plus 2 gives us 3, which this is our b value, and the c value is 2. So since we have that completely done, now we're going to put it back as our factors. So we have our x plus 2 and our x plus 1. Okay, and this technically is going to take us all the way back down to number 6 here. We have to remember from the beginning we had this 5 in step 1. So our final answer is going to read as 5 parentheses x plus 2 parentheses x plus 1. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start by factoring this next one completely. So if we look at all three terms of number 1, 2x squared, 7x, and 2, all three of them do not have something in common. So our first step to factor out something is not even possible. So we kind of just skip it. But I'm writing it down that it's not possible just so you know why I skipped that. The next one, it says that you are going to multiply a by c if a is not 1. Okay, well, a is not 1, so it is actually 2. So I am going to multiply, and I am sorry, there should be a 1 here. Should have been 21. And I'm going to multiply this by 21. So step 2, I'm going to take 2 and multiply it by 21, and I end up getting 42 as my value. The next step, when we are looking at our steps, says figure out factors of that new value of 42 that end up adding up to 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check those factors on my calculators. 42 divided by 3. There we go. So I have 42. So 14 times 3 gives me 42. And 14 plus 3 gives me 17. This is my b value, and that's my new c value of 42. So now I need to rewrite these, like I said earlier, in step 4. It says write in the form of ax squared plus factor 1 plus factor 2 plus c. Okay, so factor 1 here is 14. Factor 2 is 3. It doesn't matter which one you decide is factor 1 or factor 2. So we have 2x squared plus 14x plus 3x plus 21. Again, I got this 14 here and the 3 here. My next step that I need to take is going to be where it says group the first two terms together and factor out the greatest common factor. So I'm going to focus on these two terms of 2x squared and 14x. 2x squared plus 14x, there is a 2 and an x in common in both of those terms. So when I divide by 2x squared divided by 2x is just x, and 14x divided by 2x is 7. Now, my other ones here are 3x and 21. The greatest common factor there is 3. So 3x divided by 3 is just x, or 1x, and then 21 divided by 3 is 7. If you notice, when you are looking at this, you can see that the two factored out polynomials are x plus 7 and x plus 7 for both groups. So what that means is we are going to factor that out, meaning we're going to divide by x plus 7 again. And remember, whenever we factor something out, we actually write it again for part of our problem. So once we do that, the only thing that's remaining is our 2x and our 3 that is on the outside of parentheses. Again, I'm drawing arrows so you can see that a little bit better because it is a little difficult to see at times. So this is our final answer. So when we factor completely 2x squared plus 17x plus 21, we end up getting x plus 7 times 2x plus 3. Number 1. If we are looking at 3x cubed minus 5x squared and 2x, there is a greatest common factor this time, and that is x. So if we divide every part by x, that'll reduce it to 3x squared minus 5x plus 2. And now we actually know how to factor it. I've never taught you, and nor am I going to this year, teach you how to actually factor a cubic function. So this is a cubic function, and we aren't able to factor that unless we get it down to a quadratic function, which is x squared terms. So now what we're going to do is, since we do have something in front of our x squared, we're going to multiply a times c, which ends up giving us 6. So 3 times 2 is 6. Now I move on to my next step of factoring. What factors of 3 and 2 add up to negative 5? Well, I know that negative 6 times 1, oops, I said that wrong. Okay, sorry. So I know that negative 3 times negative 2 gives me positive 6. I also know that negative 3 plus negative 2 gives me negative 5, which this is my b value, so I know that I am good to go with that as my two factors. So now I rewrite it with my ax squared from step 1, not my original ax squared. So from step 1, I have 3x squared. Then I'm going to do minus 3x, that came here, minus 2x, again, that came here. And then from my part 1, it is just a 2 at the end. My next step is to find the greatest common factor between my first two terms. So when I look at 3x squared and negative 3x, the greatest common factor there is 3 and x. When I divide 3x squared by 3x, I am left with just x, or 1x, and 3x divided by 3x is just 1. And remember that it's a negative 1 because it was negative 3x. Don't put 0 there because 3x divided by 3x is 1. When we go back to actually FOIL this out, and if we were to check our answer, we would be able to get negative 3x in that value. If we just put x in the parentheses, it wouldn't end up working. All right, so our next one, I'm going to factor out a negative 2, and the reason is because my previous term inside the parentheses is x minus 1, positive x, not negative x. So when I take negative 2x divided by negative 2, that gives me x. And when I take 2 divided by negative 2, that gives me negative 1. And the term inside your parentheses, you always want it to be the same. So that is why I ended up using x minus 1. When I do this, remember I'm going to factor out an x minus 1 out of both terms, and then the only thing that will be left is 3x minus 2. We have to remember from the very first one, though, we need to make sure that we include our x in the front. And I'm sorry if you guys can overhear it. My two dogs are fighting. The other one's sleeping on the ground, and I thought they'd all just sleep. Unfortunately, they have decided to wrestle in my bedroom, and I don't know how to make them be quiet, but at least they aren't barking right now. Remember, as a good idea, any point in time, you can go ahead and pause this and try it on your own, or if I'm going too fast, which I know I am, I'm just trying to make sure that this video isn't 5 hours long for y'all, because I know that you have classes for everything and e-learning for everything. I don't want you here all day just working on math. We're going to continue working on this concept today and tomorrow, so it's not like you have to fully understand it today. I'll give you another option tomorrow to use, and it might be even more helpful for you. So it's very similar. It's just a different term. All right, so now we're going to move on to example number 3. Example number 3 is 10x squared plus 89x minus 9. All right, so if we look at 10x squared, 89x, and 9, none of them have a common value, so I'm just actually going to skip step 1 altogether. Like, we don't need to do things that we don't have to. But we do have an a value in front of our x, and so when we multiply 10 times negative 9, we end up getting negative 90. All right, so step 3 says, let's figure out factors of negative 90 that add up to our b term, which in this case, again, is 89. So there we go. So our b term in this case is 89, and it's positive. And remember that my product of 10 times negative 9 is negative 90, which means that one factor needs to be positive and one needs to be negative. So I'm actually going to use 90 times negative 1, which gives us negative 90, so that's good. But it also gives us our b term. 90 plus negative 1 is going to give me 89, and that is our b term, so that's what we're going to need to use. Now, our next step, step 4, I'm going to do 10x squared plus 90x minus 1x minus 9. Now, if you don't need to put that negative 1 and it's just minus x minus 9, that is completely fine. You do not have to actually put that 1 there. Remember that we're going to divide our first two terms, 10x squared and 90x, by the greatest common factor, which in this case is 10x. And then what we're going to do is 10x squared divided by 10x is just 1x or x. Now the other two dogs are fighting, so again, I'm sorry. I hope you can still hear me. 90x divided by 10x is going to give us 9, and the x's cancel out. Notice that inside our parentheses we have x plus 9, and on the other one we have negative 1x minus 9. So we need to factor out a negative 1 of those two so that we can have x plus 9 in the other parentheses. So our final answer ends up being, we're going to factor out x plus 9 since that's in common with both of our terms, and then we are left with our 10x minus 1. All right, so now we're going to work on number 4 together. So I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and get started on that. All right, so if we are looking at 7x squared minus 32x minus 60. If we look at those three terms, there is not something in common. So again, we're going to skip number 1. Step number 2 says take your values and multiply them by each other. So 7 times negative 60. And oops, I forgot the 0 there. There we go. 7 times negative 60. So we'll put that in our calculator. Just so that you know I did do it right. All right, so we have 7 times 60, and that is going to be a negative 60, so we get negative 420. All right, massive number. Okay, so this is where, unfortunately, guess and check really has to come into play. So I'm going to use negative 42 negative, and if I add 10 to that, that's going to give me negative 32. Also, 42 negative times 10 is going to give me negative 420. So it does work as negative 40 times 10 gives me, negative 42. There we go. 42 times 10 gives me negative 420. And then negative 42 plus 10 gives me negative 32. Okay, my next step. Step 4, take my ax squared, add one of my bx terms, which in this case is going to be negative 42x, plus 10x minus 60. Again, remember where these came from. trying to get it. It's not going to work. Okay. Then that negative 60 and that 7x squared came from the original at the very beginning. Now we're going to move on to factoring out our greatest common factor of the first two terms. So the greatest common factor is 7x, and we are left with x minus 6. And over here, we're going to factor out a 10, and we are left with x minus 6. We didn't have to factor out a negative 10 this time because our first term was positive 10, and our second term was negative in the first grouping, x minus 6, and the second one is also x minus 6. So when we are done with this entire problem, we are going to factor out the x minus 6 from both terms, but we still include it in our values, and the only thing left is the part outside the parentheses of 7x and 10. So that is our final answer. If you feel like you need some extra practice, go ahead and complete these two on your own. Pause the video, and then in about 3 seconds, I'm giving you that moment so that you can actually pause it. Okay, and then if you press play again, you will see the answers themselves, hopefully. And there you go. So there are answers, working through them step by step. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense to you. Again, I know it's not an easy concept to learn just via YouTube and this information. So I'm going to try to get on tomorrow and see any questions that you have. Also, I'm available all day today, so please message me, email me if we need to do a conference. We might have to use this app called Zoom. Zoom will probably be the most useful, so I'll have to send you an access code or invite you to a meeting for help. I'll try to figure out who needs help, and maybe later in the afternoon I can get around to setting up that video for you and everyone can join that would like extra help. My best advice to you, though, is stay on top of your work. Don't get burnt out. Work for 30-40 minutes, then go on to the next thing. Take a but in between that next thing, make sure you take a break. Give yourself 10-15 minute break to enjoy life, to enjoy something that you want to do. Fortnite, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever it may be. Even take a little nap and then come back to this. I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you later.